Are you ready for probably the best homemade focaccia of your life? This sourdough focaccia is nice and light with plenty of lovely air holes. Okay, let's get this in your kitchen. 4 to 12 hours before you plan on making your sourdough focaccia, feed your sourdough starter. Place 60 grams of sourdough starter in a glass jar. Feed it with 65 grams of organic all-purpose flour and 65 grams of filtered water. Set aside to ripen. You want your starter to be active before you use it. An active starter is one that has been fed 4 to 12 hours previously, has doubled in volume, is active and bubbly, and passes the flow test. By the way, I keep my starter at 100% hydration, which means I feed it equal weights, not volumes, of flour and water. After your sourdough starter is ready to use, it's time to mix together the dough. Place 450 grams of filtered water in a large bowl. Add 150 grams of sourdough starter to the bowl and mix with a spatula or Dutch dough whisk. Now add 300 grams of organic all-purpose flour, 225 grams of bread flour. I highly recommend using the bread flour because it will give the dough the strength it needs in order to maintain its loft. Since the dough is so wet, it needs the extra gluten from the bread flour in order to maintain its structure. Okay, you'll also need 1.5 tablespoons of honey, which is optional but lovely, and 1.5 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil, which is also optional but also lovely. Mix until the mixture comes together into a shaggy dough. Cover and allow to rest or Autolyse for 1 hour. After the Autolyse is complete, add 2.5 teaspoons of unrefined sea salt. Using wet hands, pinch the salt into the dough to begin to incorporate it. I like to keep a bowl of water handy in order to wet my hands so that I can work with the sticky dough. Now it's time to perform the first stretch and fold sequence. Now pretend that the dough has 4 corners. Grab one of the corners and stretch it up as far as you can without breaking the dough, and then fold it over to the opposite side of the dough. Okay, so you just grab it up, fold over. Repeat with the remaining 3 corners of dough. You can repeat this process one more time on the first stretch and fold round to get the gluten development jump started. Now cover and allow to rest for 30 minutes. Come back and perform another set of 4 stretch and folds. Repeat the stretch and fold, rest for 30-minute sequence until you've performed a total of 5 to 6 stretch and fold sequences. And as you go through the process, you'll notice that the dough becomes smoother and more elastic. You want the dough to be nice and stretchy and smooth. If it doesn't seem to have developed enough gluten, you can just add one more stretch and fold sequence. Okay, so this is looking nice and elastic. Cover the dough and allow to rise at room temperature for 1 hour. Transfer to the refrigerator and allow to ferment there for 1 to 3 days. Yep, 1 to 3 days. You can skip the cold ferment if you need to, but the focaccia will have the best flavor if you let it do a long cold ferment. You can also go ahead and place the dough in an oiled 13 by 9 inch pan before placing it in the refrigerator. It's up to you if you'd rather form the focaccia before or after the cold ferment. Now, if you chose to wait to form the sourdough, then after the cold ferment, it's time to shape the dough. Take the dough out of the refrigerator. Place 2 to 4 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil in the bottom of a 13 by 9 inch baking pan. Make sure to grease the sides of the pan as well. You can also use 2 9-inch cake pans instead of the 13 by 9 inch pan if you prefer. You'll need to reduce the baking time by about 10 minutes or so if you use the cake pans. Transfer the dough to the prepared pan and begin stretching it out to the 4 corners of the pan. When the dough won't stretch anymore, let it rest for 30 to 60 minutes. Grease a piece of plastic wrap by pouring olive oil on it and brushing it to spread it out evenly. Use this to cover the focaccia while it's resting. Come back and stretch it again until it won't stretch anymore. If you keep coming back and stretching it after letting it rest, it will eventually fill the pan. While the dough is stretching, it's also rising. It will take around 2 to 4 hours for the dough to rise properly. It will gain volume and there will be some nice air bubbles throughout. To see if it's done rising, you can do the poke test. Gently poke your finger into the dough. If it slowly springs back and doesn't quite fill in, it's done fermenting. If it springs back really quickly and completely fills in, it's not done proofing yet. If it doesn't spring back at all, then it's most likely overproofed and you need to get it in the oven ASAP. Once the focaccia is almost done proofing, preheat your oven to 450 degrees Fahrenheit or 232 degrees Celsius. Now it's time to dimple your focaccia. One of the purposes of dimpling the focaccia is to ensure that it has a more even oven spring. If you don't do this, then it will rise really high in the center and create a dome. Okay, wet your hands and then gently poke the dough all over with your fingertips. You want to go all the way down to the bottom of the pan. Don't be shy about it. After you've dimpled the whole focaccia, drizzle 2 to 4 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil all over the dough. The amount of olive oil you use will depend on how richly saturated with oil you want the final focaccia to be. If you prefer a drier focaccia, then go for the lower amount of olive oil. Now it's time to top the focaccia. You can simply sprinkle it with freshly ground black pepper and flaky sea salt and it will be delicious. But if you'd like to experiment with some different toppings, then here are some suggestions. Halved cherry tomatoes, Kalamata olives, capers, fresh herbs such as rosemary, basil, or thyme, Parmesan cheese, and garlic. If you're opting for the larger toppings such as cherry tomatoes, olives, or garlic, you can poke them into the dimples. If you're using fresh herbs or Parmesan cheese, then I recommend not adding those until the last 5 minutes of baking, otherwise they might burn. Once you've topped your focaccia to your liking, it's time to bake. Place in the preheated oven on the center rack and bake for 25 to 30 minutes, turning once halfway through baking until the focaccia is a deep brown color. If the top of the focaccia is getting done too quickly, then you can bake it on the lower third of the oven instead of in the middle. When the focaccia is done baking, remove it from the oven and allow to cool in the pan for 10 minutes. Then transfer to a wire cooling rack to cool until warm before slicing. I like to run a knife around the edges of the pan, then use a metal spatula to loosen the bottom and lift the whole thing out. Isn't that crumb just lovely? You can serve this with good quality butter or a mixture of extra virgin olive oil and balsamic vinegar for dipping. If you haven't tried extra virgin olive oil and balsamic vinegar for dipping, then I highly recommend giving it a go. Now, if you're looking for another delicious sourdough recipe, then make sure to check out my sourdough pizza crust. It's a must-try for sourdough lovers. Sorry if I accidentally mispronounced focaccia during this video. The proper way apparently is focaccia. I grew up saying focaccia though, so that's just what I automatically say sometimes, so sorry. And now I'm going to put it in the refrigerator. Ah, it's a spider. Okay, not that refrigerator. There's a spider on it. I have to kill it.